Okay, let's unpack a word that I guarantee you have seen at least 5 times today. It is in every headline, every angry tweet, and every opposition speech whenever the government, drops the ball. Accountability.
It's the golden standard, isn't it?
Yeah.
It sounds so firm, so reassuring,
It's final.
and it usually implies a very specific ending to the story.
It feels like the period at the end of a sentence. Once we have accountability, the problem is solved and we can all move on. But today we are doing a deep dive into this fascinating piece of research called Redesigning Political Accountability, from Erasure to Repair.
And I think its central argument is going to make some people very uncomfortable.
It definitely challenges the default setting of modern politics.
Hmm.
The argument is that the way we use that word, and specifically the way we fire politicians to achieve it, might actually be breaking the system.
Yeah.
That by demanding heads roll, we're actually ensuring that the government gets stupider over time.
It raises a really provocative question right off the bat, which is, what is the actual goal of accountability? I mean, when a scandal breaks and we demand a resignation, what are we really trying to achieve? Are we looking for deterrence? Are we looking for, a bit of revenge? Do we just want a sense of moral closure? Or, and this should be the big one, is the goal to actually make the system work better next time?
And the problem, according to this source, is that those goals are often mutually exclusive.
They really are.
You can have the punishment or you can have the learning, but you rarely get both.
We tend to conflate punishing the person with fixing the problem. We assume that if the bad apple is gone, the barrel is clean. But this deep dive suggests that by firing the person who messed up, we might be engaging in a form of erasure.
Erasure. That's the key term we're going to spend some time on. Because normally, if I screw up at my job, let's say I delete all the audio files for this show,
Oh, no.
I get fired. And my boss would say that's accountability. So why does this source argue that firing a minister is erasure?
Well, let's look at the mechanics of a failure. Think about a massive government IT rollout that crashes on day one.
Classic. We've all seen that movie.
Millions of dollars wasted, login screens don't work, total disaster. So step one is the failure. Step two is the pile-on.
The media frenzy.
The media goes into a frenzy. The opposition screams. The public is angry. The pressure builds like a boiler. And the government has to release that pressure.
So they sacrifice someone. The minister in charge resigns.
Exactly. And that is the clean ending. The villain leaves the stage. The public feels a sense of discharge. Justice is served. But think about what actually happens to the information. The person walking out the door with their cardboard box. That is the person who knows more about why the project failed than anyone else on Earth.
They're the black box recorder.
Precisely. They know where the bodies are buried. They know which meetings were skipped. They know which contractors overpromised. They know exactly which pressure points caused the pipe to burst.
And we kick them out.
And we kick it out. So we are essentially, we're wiping the hard drive.
Yeah. We're lobotomizing the institution.
That's the word the source uses. We remove the memory of the error. A new person comes in. Clean, fresh, untainted by the scandal.
But they also have zero contact. They don't know the history.
Right. So the system resets, but the incentives that caused the failure, they're still there. The structural problems, still there. The system is now just, as the source puts it, lighter on experience and heavier on caution.
Wow. That is a really striking line. Lighter on experience, heavier on caution. So we aren't fixing the bug in the code.
Right.
We're just deleting the error message and hoping it doesn't pop up again.
And it almost always does,
Right.
because ministerial responsibility is viewed almost entirely as a moral category. It's about sin and penance. It's not about engineering or systems.
But hold on, let me play the angry voter here for a second, because if you're listening to this, you're thinking, if you messed up, you have to go. If a minister stays after a disaster, it looks arrogant.
It looks like they're getting away with it.
Yeah.
It looks suspicious. The source explicitly mentions this. Staying involved after a failure is viewed as self-serving. It looks like you're clinging to power.
So removal becomes the only acceptable clean ending.
It is theater. It's a morality play that satisfies the audience, but it leaves the theater burning.
So the priority is the emotional satisfaction of the voter.
Not the functional competence of the government.
Correct.
And that's a trade-off we make every single day without even realizing it.
Okay, so to explain why this is so backward, the source brings in a comparison that I honestly hadn't considered before. It moves us away from politics entirely for a moment.
Right, because if you look at other high-stakes professions, aviation, nuclear engineering, medicine, they handle failure completely differently.
The source specifically compares politicians to GPs, general practitioners.
It seems like a stretch at first, doesn't it? A doctor and a politician. But when you break down the job description, the similarities are really strong.
Okay, walk us through that. How is an MP like a doctor?
Well, think about what a GP actually does. First off, they're generalists. A GP isn't a cardiologist or a neurologist.
Right.
They don't know everything about everything.
Right.
Their job is to assess a situation, triage the problem, escalate it to the right specialist, and coordinate the care.
Okay, that tracks. A minister isn't an expert in building bridges or designing software or fighting pandemics. They're managing a huge range of issues, relying on advice from specialists.
Right. And they operate in high-stakes environments. They're making decisions constantly, often with imperfect information under massive time pressure. And here's the reality of that kind of environment.
Things go wrong.
Sometimes things go wrong. Diagnoses are missed, treatments fail.
But, and this is the key difference the source highlights, when a GP makes a mistake, even a serious one, we don't immediately scream for them to be fired and stripped of their license.
No, we don't. Unless it's something truly horrific. I mean, we're talking malice, gross negligence, showing up to work drunk. We don't fire them. The medical field, and the aviation field too, realized a long time ago that firing people for honest mistakes is dangerous.
So what do they do instead?
They ask a totally different set of questions. They don't ask who is to blame.
No.
They ask, why did this happen? Was this a systems issue? Was there a training gap? Was the workload too high? Was the software confusing?
They treat the error as a data point, not a sin.
Precisely. The response is review, supervision, learning, and adjustment. They don't remove the doctor because they understand something that politics has completely ignored.
What's that?
If you remove people at the first sign of failure, you lose competence faster than you gain safety.
Wow. Say that again?
You lose competence faster than you gain safety.
That sounds like the opposite of every political campaign I've ever seen.
It is the core difference between a blame culture and a just culture. Think about a pilot. If a pilot reports a near miss or a mechanical error they made, they aren't punished. They are often thanked.
Right.
Because if you punish every error with expulsion, people stop reporting errors.
They hide them.
And if people hide errors, the system becomes incredibly dangerous because you are flying blind.
So why does politics refuse to learn this lesson? Why do we treat every error as a firing offense? Is it just because politicians are less popular than doctors?
Part of it is the optics.
Yeah.
The source argues that politics treats error as contamination.
Contamination. That is a visceral word.
It is.
Yeah.
But think about the political party as an organism. Once a politician is associated with a failure, a scandal, a botched rollout, a bad headline, they are radioactive.
Yeah.
If they stay involved, it feels uncomfortable for the institution. It feels like the failure is sticking to the party brand.
So the safest move for the party, for the government, is distance. Amputate the infected limb.
Get that person away from us. But this creates what the source calls a strange inversion.
An inversion, how so?
Yes. In a functioning system, when something breaks, you want the people with the most knowledge to be the ones fixing it. You want the engineer who built the bridge to be there when you figure out why it cracked. But in politics, the people with the clearest view of the failure, the ones who are in the room, are the first to leave.
And the people who remain?
They inherit the consequences, but they don't have the context.
So the new guy comes in, looks at the mess, and says, wow, the last guy was an idiot, but doesn't understand why the last guy made those choices.
Exactly. They're cleaning up a mess they don't understand.
Yeah.
And because they don't understand the root cause, the same mistakes quietly become easier to repeat.
Yeah.
We don't call it a learning loop. We just call it moving on,
And moving on is usually just a polite way of saying forgetting.
or ensuring that we're doomed to repeat it.
But let's play devil's advocate again here. I think a lot of listeners might be shouting at their speakers right now saying, wait a minute, doctors and pilots are trained professionals. Politicians are. Well, politicians. They lie. They cover things up. That's why we fire them. We fire them because we don't trust them.
And that is a totally fair point.
Yeah.
The trust is historically low. But we have to ask why they hide mistakes. Is it because all politicians are inherently bad people, born with a gene for dishonesty?
Or is it because of the incentives we've set up?
Exactly. It's the environment. If the punishment for admitting a mistake is the end of your career, you're never going to admit a mistake.
It's basic risk versus reward.
It is. The source outlines the logic very clearly. If the cost of failure is expulsion, if one strike means you're out, then honesty becomes the most dangerous strategy you can adopt.
It's just survival instinct.
100%.
Hmm.
If admitting a mistake leads to losing your career, you are going to deny, deflect, and hide it for as long as possible. You're going to bury the report. You're going to silence the whistleblowers. You're going to classify the documents.
And if staying involved to fix the problem just looks like you're clinging to power, then you're not going to volunteer to fix it.
No way.
You're going to try to survive until the next election or hope another news story distracts everyone.
Right. So what happens is that early warnings dry up. People stay silent until the problem is so big it can't be hidden.
Yeah.
And by then, it's a catastrophe.
This leads to a really grim realization in the text. The source argues that this system acts like a form of natural selection.
It does. Think about what traits we are selecting for. Over time, the system selects for people who are good at surviving moments.
Right.
It selects for people who are good at PR, good at deflection, good at shifting blame to their subordinates.
Teflon politicians, nothing sticks.
Exactly. But notice what is missing. The system does not select for people who are good at fixing structures. We are breeding a class of politicians whose primary skill is dodging the axe rather than solving the problem.
That explains so much about modern governance, doesn't it? We have a surplus of survivors and a deficit of fixers.
It really does. And if you are a fixer, someone who admits hard truths and tries to address them, you get eaten alive by the system very quickly.
So what's the alternative? Because we can't just let them off the hook. That feels wrong too. The source proposes a new model, and honestly, when I first read it, it sounded a little radical.
It is radical in today's climate. The proposal is repair before removal.
Stay with the problem.
Exactly. The idea is that admitting a mistake shouldn't be the end of your usefulness. It should be the beginning of your obligation.
I really like that framing, the beginning of your obligation. It's almost like you broke it, you bought it. Or rather, you broke it, you fix it.
Yes, it flips the narrative completely. Right now, resignation is the honorable thing to do. You resign, you give a sad speech, and you go write a memoir or join a corporate board.
It's actually kind of easy.
It is. It's a clean exit. You get to walk away from the fire you started.
Right.
But under this new model, you don't get to walk away. You are expected to explain exactly what happened. You're expected to stay involved in the correction. You help redesign the process. You help tighten the rules.
You have to stand in front of your colleagues and the public and say, here is exactly how I got this wrong, and here is exactly how we are fixing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have to be super clear here because I can hear the outrage building. The source puts in some very important caveats. This isn't for everything.
Crucial caveats.
Yes.
Yes. This does not apply to corruption. It doesn't apply to malice. It doesn't apply to harassment or illegality.
Of course not.
If you stole money or intentionally hurt people, you are gone. We are talking about competence failures, policy failures, systemic oversights.
Right. If you tried to launch a healthcare website and it crashed because the traffic was too high, that's a competence failure. If you embezzled the money for the website, that's a crime.
Exactly. It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for bad actors.
No.
In fact, the source argues that this method creates a quieter but more demanding accountability.
How so? Because to the public, it might look like letting them off easy.
Think about it from the politician's perspective. Which is easier? Quitting, walking away, and blaming the department, or staying in the room, facing the people you let down every single day, and doing the hard, grinding work of fixing a broken system under intense supervision.
When you put it that way, staying is definitely harder. It's humiliating, in a way. It forces you to swallow your pride.
It does. It strips away the ego. It forces you to confront the failure. It forces the institution to confront the failure. You can't just pretend it didn't happen because the person responsible is still sitting right there working on the fix.
And it builds that thing we talked about earlier, institutional memory.
That is the key to solving long-term problems. You don't solve complex issues with clean exits. You solve them by accumulating memory, by adjusting incentives, by making it safer to tell the truth early, even when that truth is uncomfortable.
It's funny, the source mentions that we already know how to do this in almost every other high-stakes field. When a plane crashes, the NTSB investigation is about finding the cause, not just finding a scapegoat. They don't just want to fire the pilot, they want to redesign the cockpit so the next pilot doesn't make the same mistake.
The goal in those fields is safety. The goal is to ensure it never happens again. In politics, the goal often seems to be to ensure the scandal ends as quickly as possible. Those are two very different objectives. One is about the future, the other is about the news cycle.
So the argument here is that the question isn't whether this repair model is possible. We know it's possible. It's why we've decided politics should be the exception.
It really challenges us to rethink our own reactions as voters, doesn't it? When we see a politician in hot water, our instinct is off with their head. It feels good. It
Yeah.
feels righteous.
It satisfies that need for justice. It feels like we are doing our job as citizens.
But maybe we should be asking, wait, what do they know about this failure that we need to keep in the room? If we fire them, does the knowledge go with them?
It's a shift from a culture of blame and exit to one of learning and repair.
And that shift could change everything.
So, bringing it back to the listener, why should you care about the HR policies of Parliament or Congress? It feels a bit inside baseball.
It does, until you realize the impact. Because the current system gives us politicians who are terrified of admitting they are human.
Yeah.
And that means we get a government that is terrified of innovation, terrified of transparency, and incapable of learning from its own history. If we want a government that actually works, that can build things, fix things, and improve, we might need to let them fail.
And then, crucially, make them stay to fix it.
Exactly, instead of just swapping out the figurehead and waiting for the next crash.
Precisely. If we want better outcomes, we have to change the inputs. And the most important input is how we treat failure.
This has been a really eye-opening look at something we usually take for granted. We see a resignation and think, good, problem solved. But the reality is much, much messier.
It is. And before we go, there is one final thought from the source that I think is really worth chewing on.
Lay it on us.
We've talked about what happens after the failure. But the source asks, if we redesigned accountability around learning and repair, if politicians knew they wouldn't be immediately fired for an honest mistake, what would that change upstream?
You mean before the failure even happens?
Exactly. How would it change their behavior today? How would it change their honesty? How would it change their time horizons?
That's interesting. If I know I'm not going to be executed for a mistake,
Yeah.
maybe I'm more likely to raise my hand and say, hey, this project is going off the rails 6 months before it crashes.
Right. You stop hiding the red flags. You stop massaging the numbers. If you aren't constantly looking over your shoulder waiting to be purged, maybe you start looking further ahead.
Maybe you start pointing out problems before they become disasters.
That is a fascinating thought. Maybe true accountability isn't about the axe falling. Maybe it's about creating a world where we don't need the axe quite so often.
That's the hope, a system that learns rather than a system that just punishes.
Well, that gives us plenty to think about next time a scandal breaks and the headlines start screaming for heads to roll. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.